Welcome everyone to our session on barriers to belonging from an Indigenous perspective. My name's Krista Carr. I am the CEO of Inclusion Canada and a member of the Disability and Work in Canada Steering Committee. Really pleased to be your moderator for today's session. And I have joining me today Neil Belanger, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, but I want to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqey and Passamaquoddy people, and would invite you all to take a moment to acknowledge the territory that you are joining from today as well. So it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Neil Belanger. Neil has over 30 years experience within Canada's Indigenous and non-Indigenous disability and health sectors. But particularly for the past 10 years, Neil has been the executive director of the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, lovingly known by many of us as BCANDS, BCANDS, an Indigenous disability organization holding special consultative status with the UN. Neil is also the CEO of a newly created national organization called Indigenous Disability Canada. BCANDS provides a variety of programs and services relating to Indigenous disability across Canada, and their work has been highlighted through numerous provincial, national, and international awards and recognitions. The most recent being the Zero Project International Award presented to the Society in Vienna, Austria in 2019. In addition to his work with both Indigenous Disability Canada and BCANDS, Neil serves in a variety of disability-related advisory roles. So Neil's going to talk a little bit to us today about some of the barriers to belonging, particularly when it comes to Indigenous people in the workplace and beyond. And when Neil's done, we're going to open it up for a Q&A, and I'll moderate that. And so you can feel free to start populating the Q&A function with your questions. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Krista, for that dated introduction. Where'd you get that from? 2017? What is that? Anyways, hi, everyone. As Krista said, my name is Neil Belanger, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Indigenous Disability Canada and BCANDS. I'm calling in today from the traditional territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees people, and I'd like to recognize the territories that each of you are on today. I'm also a member of the Lac-Seul clan in the House of Niganane of the Gitxsan First Nation, and as Krista says, I've been working in health and disability for the last over 30 years. And so before I get started, I'll give you a little background about the organization I work for here, Indigenous Disability Canada, the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. So as Krista noted, we're a national Indigenous disability organization. We've been around for just over 31 years. 2022 marks our 31st year. And we provide a variety of services directly to individuals and family, Indigenous persons living with disabilities, both within First Nation and non-First Nations communities. So some of the programs that we run are Indigenous Disability Case Management Program, where we connect people and families to resources. We help out with applications for different programs and services. We work within housing, healthcare. So basically, if you're an Indigenous person with a disability and you need assistance in accessing some services, you can come to us, and our case managers will assist you in that. We also have the Indigenous Disability or Indigenous RDSP Savings Plan program, where not unlike the case management program, we work with eligible individuals, eligible meaning that they have their disability tax credit, to help them open up a registered disability savings plan, which is one of the federal government's more progressive programs that they've introduced over the years. We've been quite successful there. We started that program in 2016. And I think that we've probably opened up probably around $15 million worth of RDSPs. But if families and individuals could contribute to the maximum, it'd be around $40 million. So that's quite impressive. It's a very good program. We also adjudicate persons with disabilities benefit applications here in BC on behalf of the federal government for BC's 203 First Nations. We have provincial Jordan's Principle program working again with eligible individuals and families, both residing within First Nations, non-First Nations communities. We have our support for Indigenous student learning program, where we're giving out a couple of $1 million worth of computers to eligible Indigenous students. We do a lot of research on accessibility. And
Neil, I've had a request for you to slow down a little bit for our captioners and interpreters. So I'm just gonna try to get you to slow down.
Sorry about that. Anyways, that's enough about our organization. We also work heavily with the CRPD, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We work with a number of organizations in relation to medical assistance in dying, which is appropriate because we're talking about barriers to inclusion today, and a number of other research projects with universities, both nationally and internationally, focusing on disability and inclusion. So I'm very pleased to be able to be here today, even though I'm a fast talker, with all of you to talk about some of the barriers that individuals and families that we serve experience day to day within employment across the whole gamut of living within Canada. So I've had the opportunity to work here for years. I've worked within Indigenous health, non-Indigenous health, Indigenous disability, within employment for disability as well. So I come with a lot of experience, not necessarily a lot of knowledge. I'm always learning, but we see a lot of barriers out there that affect Indigenous and non-Indigenous people living with disabilities. But I think if we talk about Canada today, whether we're talking about employment or housing or just generally being treated as an Indigenous person with a disability, the overwhelming barrier, and we've seen this recently again, is anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination. And unfortunately, although provincial and federal governments have tried to implement measures to address this on some level, typically they're more reactionary than progressive in planning. As you all may be aware, in Winnipeg recently, they've identified, arrested a man, a serial killer who's murdered 4 young Indigenous women. And unfortunately, our history and our current history is replete with this. And we see it in the case of Keegan Combs here in British Columbia, a young Indigenous man living with a developmental disability who was basically left to perish while in care of the hospital because they didn't take his concerns legitimately. We know Joyce Echuan down east, who in Quebec, who was taunted by healthcare workers, and again left to die in the healthcare system that was there to protect. And this is what we deal with every day. We see people being arrested when they try to open up a bank account with their granddaughter because people are unfamiliar with status cards or identification pertaining to Indigenous people, and the reaction is always extreme. It's never, I shouldn't say always, but it's very seldom understanding and in a position where people want to learn. So we see that, and we see it across all systems. It's not just within healthcare. It's not just within banking. It's not just, wherever. It's everywhere. It permeates throughout all of our societies and different organizations, government, non-government. And it creates a huge barrier for people, for Indigenous people with disabilities wanting to access services. And the result is that they don't access those services. So their conditions can be amplified, their health, disability conditions, their employment status, their housing. If you feel that you cannot get proper support, you can't get respect, or you're going to be disrespected when you try to access these services, why would you go? And we deal with that all the time. Systemic poverty is another barrier. 2016, the government Stats Canada released a report noting that 80% of First Nations in Canada have a medium income under the poverty line. There are 634 First Nations in Canada. There are 53 Inuit communities and numerous Métis chartered territories. We have a population of about 1.8 million who identify as being Indigenous, and the disability rate for Indigenous people is probably around 35%, so significantly higher than that of the general population. And again, there's a number of reasons for that: poverty being one, access to food, nutritious foods, inaccessible communities, some of the traditional activities of communities out on the land as well. So we have a number of things that impact the higher rate of disabilities. But inclusion, yeah, I mean, I could go on for a long time talking about different things here, but realistically, if we talk about inclusion, we talk about anti-Indigenous discrimination and racism. We talk about attitudes towards Indigenous people. There's still that myth out there that all Indigenous people, they get all their housing for free. You know, they don't have to work if they want to. They can all go to school. All those things that I'm sure typically a lot of people here on this call have heard, but are simply untrue. But yet that's the mindset that they have to work within these systems. We also have provincial and federal and territorial jurisdiction issues as well. So when we work with an individual or a family, we have to do fairly comprehensive background gathering and information on them about their Indigenous ancestry, where they live, you know, where their nation is. And that can often dictate what kind of programs and services they're eligible for, because they do difference between federal and provincial jurisdictions. So that adds extra time and stress onto the individual as well. And again, when we talk about government positions such as medical assistance in dying, so we're quite active on that file with Inclusion Canada and other partners as well, looking at the slippery slope or the expansion of medical assistance in dying in Canada. Just recently, we saw 2 expert panel reports on mature minors and mental illness as a sole condition. In both those reports, they highlight that there's been no consultation or engagement with Indigenous communities in Canada. So what we have is law that is being put forward and being changed to expand eligibility for MAID without talking to one of the most vulnerable populations, made vulnerable by the systems that we have in Canada, Indigenous people with disabilities. This is particularly true in the instance of mental health, for example, when you have people living in northern or remote communities, when trying to get access to mental health services is almost next to impossible in a timely manner, where people have been waiting years for services that aren't delivered. But now we see that the government and governments are advancing this, making eligibility more open, even though you cannot get services to live a good life. And we can apply that to many things as well. So if we look at communities as well, the inaccessible communities here, we know that or many of you may be aware of the Accessible Canada Act, which was put into law in 2019, you know, under the federal, you know, governing federally regulated entities such as banks and airports and First Nations. However, First Nations were exempted from that for 5 years. So they do not fall under the Accessible Canada Act. Well, the government tries to take a look and see, because there's a cost factor there. So we have many inaccessible communities, many communities that don't have running water, that don't have roads, paved roads, don't have sidewalks. Some of their buildings are 2-story with no elevators. So the barriers for being included in their own community, because planning wasn't done properly, or the need wasn't there at the time, whatever the case may be, becomes problematic as well. So if you can't get a job within your own community because you might use a wheelchair and the only position available is in a building that's totally inaccessible, I mean, these create other issues as well. But Canada exempted First Nations under the Accessible Canada Act, saying that, you know, in the spirit of UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and lack of consultation. So we have, which is kind of a interesting situation, where we have the Accessible Canada Act, which would cost money to implement changes to make sure communities, First Nations communities, are all accessible. It would cost billions of dollars. we now exempt First Nations from that, saying that there wasn't proper consultation. Where we have made medical assistance in dying, which actually saves provincial and federal governments money, and they acknowledge that they haven't done any consultation with Indigenous people across Canada, but they're going to move forward. So we see on one hand where there's where investment in funding and support is necessary to make Canada truly inclusive. We've exempted First Nations, but on the other hand, where there's cost savings that could come in and we've done no consultation with Indigenous people, we further go forward and keep moving forward that way. And that seems to be the trend often when we're talking about changes to Indigenous systems that affect Indigenous people, Indigenous persons living with disabilities specifically, that often were brought into after decisions have made to consult on policy changes and recommendations, and how do we move forward from decisions that have already been made for our clients and our communities. And that's problematic. Too often we're not at the table. Too often persons with disabilities, Indigenous persons with disabilities, are not involved in the process. But then, something comes forward. I can't tell you how many times I've had meetings with governments where they've brought me great ideas after the fact, after they've developed them, which didn't make any sense whatsoever. And whether you're in Ottawa or in Winnipeg or in Vancouver or in Halifax, these ideas may look good in that office and they may make sense to the person developing these things and saying, in a perfect world, this is how things will work. But it doesn't always translate to our communities, and we do not live in a perfect world. And until we do something as a country to address anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination against persons with disabilities, I don't think that we can really go forward. And I don't think that we'll be a truly inclusive country. When we look at the employment side here, yeah, we often see people that we work with that we may assist going to school or getting employment come back to us and say, I can't go there. The comments by employees or by other staff members, even management, are unbearable, because often we have clients that may not present visually as being Indigenous, but are full status or are Métis. And people, when they often don't realize that they may be standing with somebody who is Indigenous or someone who has an invisible disability, they feel more free to talk, and they'll talk about this, and they'll talk about their feelings. They'll talk about, the drain on the systems by persons with disabilities, by Indigenous people with disabilities. This creates a hostile work environment. It doesn't make it conducive for everybody to want to go back there. It doesn't make it conducive to make a career of these things. So we need those things in place, and not in a reactionary way that when all of a sudden something hits a newspaper that we're going to all of a sudden have a national meeting and talk about the things. We need to start doing things now on an ongoing basis to address discrimination, racism, to address, violence against women with disabilities, Indigenous women with disabilities, all those things that we know are prevalent, and they've been prevalent for a long time. But as a country, we haven't done really anything to do anything to change it. We also need to be curious as individuals, as service providers, and as governments, to know who people are, who Indigenous people are in their community, in the urban centers, and be part of a bigger picture. And not only, again, during time of crisis, because that never works, but to be part of their community ongoing, and to go in there not with saying, well, how can I fix you? But saying, I want to learn about you. I want you to help me better understand and be a part of that community. And we don't see that often enough. We see it sporadically. We see many organizations and service providers that are reluctant to. They're reluctant to offend. They're afraid to engage. They don't know how to engage. And because of all these factors, they don't engage. And then nothing moves forward. And then, some organizations, some people don't think it's within their mandate. But it's not. If we are a community here and we're trying to build a more inclusive Canada for everybody, then it's in everybody's mandates. Anti-Indigenous racism, discrimination is everybody's priority. All the things that we see happening in Canada today, it can't be handled by a few organizations or a few people. It has to be handled by us all. And until we get to that point, we'll always have barriers. We'll have topics like this come up at different events as well. And we'll talk about how we can do things differently in the future. And unfortunately, I know that because many of the conversations that I have today, I've had 20 years ago, and we haven't progressed from them. We haven't moved forward from them. So as we do move forward, though, when we talk about Indigenous people and persons with disabilities, we really have to make sure that they're involved in the process and they help design the systems that we want them to live in. Because if we don't do that, it's never going to work out. It's never going to happen. And again, like I said, I don't know how many meetings I've been involved with that I've talked about, back in the 80s, and the same situations and the same things and the same solutions, just written differently. I remember here when I first started here, we started going through some old documents that we had. There was a report by whatever the ministry was called back then, saying by 2020, every person living with a disability within British Columbia will have a job. And those are great aspirational things. They're just not realistic. Many people can't work. Many people can work sporadically, depending upon their needs and their disability. And there's never been a concerted effort to actually make that happen, other than it looks good on paper. So, there's multiple barriers that I haven't covered as well. I mean, just tons of them that we experience in our everyday work here. And I know that other service providers experience as well. But we haven't really done anything to combat them. Like I said, we're more reactive than proactive, and we got to change that.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Now, I see that somebody did ask, are your services just in BC? So maybe you could just start by a little bit about, Indigenous Disability Canada versus BCANS and how that.
So we run, yeah, thanks, Krista. We run programs both nationally and in BC. So most of our direct service programs are based in BC. So our Indigenous Disability Case Management, our Indigenous RDSP program, our Persons with Disability Benefit Adjudication, our Jordan's Principle are all based in BC, but we're in the process of expanding those across Canada and to other provinces and territories. That being said, we work with individuals across Canada because we know that resources are limited. So often we'll get a call from Ontario or from PEI or from Saskatchewan, someone who is in dire straits, someone who needs assistance. And as a service provider, regardless of where our services are, we don't think it's on us to say, well, don't call us, because then we would be part of the problem. We would be part of that barrier to inclusion. So we'll work with people and we'll do as much as we can. It helps us as an organization as well to show that there's a need, not only in BC, but across Canada, and also let the person know that they're important. One of the big things is with any service that we provide, whether it's national, like the computer program or our research program or the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is that every intervention that we can do with an individual and family shows that somebody cares. It shows that somebody is trying to do something for them. The worst thing that can ever happen to an individual is knowing that nobody cares, or nobody seems to care, or they don't seem to be fitting into anybody's mandate. I can't tell you how many times we have people that have come to us in desperation, and we've helped them out, and they've said, you're the first organization that's ever taken us seriously in 10 years. And that happens all the time. And disability, Indigenous disability, is not a high priority in Canada, even within our own communities, and largely because there's so many other priorities that haven't been addressed. So if we talk about the poverty, we talk about inaccessibility, we talk about anti-Indigenous racism, all those things that, leadership within communities and the community itself have to deal with, disability often falls to the lowest rung of the ladder. And that's not right. We see even when Indigenous people go and they go to university or school or higher education, whatever the case may be, they're often considered not to be at par as non-Indigenous people, that somehow their education is less than that of non-Indigenous people. And we see that throughout government systems and other organizations. And I have many colleagues I spoke to and said, we're just disrespected. Just because we're Indigenous, we're not considered to be equal. Because that somehow our education might even be the same university is somehow less than someone who is non-Indigenous. Excuse me for. No, we have that too. But the question is, it depends on what you're asking for. Some programs are national, some are more localized, but we'll help when we can. And we have an amazing team here. It has nothing to do with me, because if they're like me, they wouldn't be as good as they are. Krista will vouch for that. We have good people, and we hire people here that want to make a difference in the lives of people. Not because it's ethically the right thing to do, it's because who they are as people, as individuals. So when I leave and I have to go to meetings, I do other things like that, I have no hesitation or worry that the people that we serve are coming will not be treated well, will not be served well. We haven't always hired the best people, but they never last because we move them along, because they're not conducive to the work that we do, and we're not conducive to the people that we serve. So uh, Beacans is a good organization, and it's made up by the people that are good people. And, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done across Canada for Indigenous people with disabilities. We need more people like we have here. We're working towards that, but yeah, we continue.